Chloe, the campus beauty, has been cursed, unleashing a secret about my lost soul. What exactly is that red ring Silas, the senior student, gave her? My mysterious husband, Evan, is forcing me to go along with him, and the unknown cost of this journey makes me feel uneasy. The way Silas looked at me with that probing gaze made it seem like he'd never let up until I spoke. I had no choice but to say, "Waiting for my fiancé." Fiancé. Silas froze, his eyes filled with disbelief. How come I didn't know you had a fiancé? His words heightened my vigilance. Did he need to know whether I had a fiancé or not? Or had he been investigating me all along? Whether I have a fiancé is none of your business, I replied coldly, keeping him at a distance. Most people would have taken the hint and left, but not Silas. He stayed right beside me, smiling faintly as he stared at me, so intensely that it sent shivers down my spine. I inched away, but he just glanced at me and didn't move. I let out a silent breath of relief, thinking anxiously, where was Evan? Standing here with Silas felt utterly uncomfortable. Suddenly, a shrill scream echoed from the ballroom, followed by a hubbub of voices. Silas, who was standing next to me, suddenly tensed up and strode quickly into the ballroom. With his tall, lanky figure, he disappeared in an instant. At the same time, Evan's voice suddenly rang in my ear. "Come in." "Go in?" I frowned. I had no idea what was happening inside, but judging by the commotion, it was definitely nothing good. Perhaps driven by curiosity, I hesitated for only a second after hearing Evan's voice before hurrying into the ballroom. As I walked, I whispered, "Evan, where are you?" "Where the crowd is thickest. That's where I am." Evan replied promptly. The thickest crowd meant the noisiest spot, right? I quickened my pace and burst into the ballroom. It was chaos inside, and no one paid any attention to me, an uninvited guest. I searched the crowd for Evan and spotted him standing calmly amid a group of panicky people. His understated, yet luxurious red robe stood out sharply against the fashionable evening attire around him. Strangely enough, it was as if no one could see him. He raised his slender, knuckle-defined hand and beckoned to me, his voice echoing in my ear again. "Come here." Not knowing what was going on, I obediently ran over to him. Maybe it was Evan's doing, but I felt like my presence had faded. None of the strangers around seemed to notice me. I covered my mouth with my hand and whispered, "Why did you call me here? What's happening?" Evan tilted his chin, gesturing for me to look toward the center of the crowd. I followed his gaze, but at only 5 feet 3 inches tall, I couldn't see a thing past the circle of people. I scratched my nose awkwardly. I'm too short to see inside. I looked up at Evan, who was at least 6 feet tall, probably between 6 feet and 6 feet 3 inches. "Can't you stand on your tiptoes?" Evan frowned. I did as he said, helpless, and told him, "See? Even on tiptoes, I still can't see." Evan looked down at me. "Didn't your parents tell you to eat more when you were little? Why are you so short?" I wanted to argue that 5 feet 3 inches was a perfectly reasonable height for a girl, more than enough to be cute and petite. But before I could speak, Evan wrapped his long arm around me and lifted me up with one hand. By the time I realized what was happening, I was sitting on his shoulders, a position that made me feel like he was holding a little girl. "Take a good look, damn it," Evan said impatiently. I muttered to myself. Couldn't he see with his own eyes? Why did he have to lift me up? But my eyes obediently turned to the center of the crowd. There, a young girl in a white dress was kneeling on the floor, about my age. Her body was convulsing violently, and the most terrifying thing was the black veins protruding on her pale arms, neck, and collarbones. No, wait, they weren't veins. They were black tendrils. Even her face was starting to be covered with thin, crack-like black streaks that looked like blood vessels. My heart skipped a beat. What was wrong with her? "Evan, what's wrong with her? It doesn't look like a normal illness," I asked anxiously. Evan's brows furrowed. "It's not an illness. She's possessed." "Possessed?" I gasped softly, my eyes fixed on the girl. No one dared to approach her, and she was making low, animal-like growls from her throat. There was something familiar about her, but her face was almost completely covered by the black web-like streaks, making it hard to recognize her. Is there a doctor here? Please, someone help my daughter. Where's the ambulance? A wealthy-looking woman stamped her feet nearby, distraught and helpless. The girl's convulsions were getting worse, her limbs twisting at angles that looked like they might snap at any moment. I tore my eyes away, rubbing the goosebumps on my arms, and asked Evan beside me, "Why did you make me look at this? Do you have a purpose?" Evan's gaze turned dark. Earlier, I sensed that the soul fragment you lost was in her, but now it's gone. Vanished suddenly. Thanks to his reminder, I noticed that the soul-guiding jade around my neck had stopped burning and returned to its usual cool state. If we want to find out what's going on, that girl is our breakthrough, Evan said. I hesitated. So what? So? We need to talk to her alone. But before that, we have to deal with her possession. Evan replied, looking at me. I understood the logic, but if we went up to her family now and said, "Your daughter is possessed," we'd definitely be chased away, especially with so many people watching. Evan glanced at me coldly, then set me down. He pushed me toward the center of the crowd and said, "I don't care. Your job is to convince them to let us talk to her alone." As if an invisible force pushed the onlookers aside, clearing a path for me. Evan gave me a hard shove, and I stumbled forward, falling flat on my face right in front of the girl. "Evan, you jerk." "Ouch." I cried out in pain. Evan's push had thrown me into the spotlight. My fall and scream drew everyone's attention. I was lying on my stomach in front of the possessed girl, so when I looked up, I came face to face with her eyes. Her eyes were completely white, no black pupils at all. Because she was hanging her head, convulsing with her body, no one else around had seen her eyes. The moment I saw her eyes, an overwhelming wave of sadness and hatred washed over me, like a dark tide threatening to engulf me. Fortunately, Evan's voice rang in my head just in time. "Lila, snap out of it. Damn it." His voice jolted me awake, and I quickly looked away, not daring to meet her eyes again. I scrambled to my feet, using my hands and knees. The task Evan had given me was practically impossible. Even if I spoke up, there was no guarantee they'd believe me. By this time, the girl's body was twisting more and more violently, and I could almost hear the sound of her bones cracking. If we delayed any longer, she would definitely die. The wealthy woman was already beside herself with panic, not knowing what to do. Remembering Evan's instructions, I gritted my teeth and said to the woman, "Madam, I can cure your daughter." The crowd fell silent instantly. Everyone turned to look at me, including the woman, who had been wiping her tears. Her eyes clearly showed disbelief. With all eyes on me, I forced myself to continue. This young lady isn't suffering from a normal illness. As you can see, the black tendrils on her body and her twisted limbs. I paused, panicking. Evan hadn't given me a single line to work with. How was I supposed to make this up? I looked at Evan, but he was standing outside the crowd, watching me with amusement, showing no intention of helping. He was clearly enjoying the show. Could this man be deliberately setting me up? "Who are you? What are you trying to say? What's really wrong with my daughter?" The woman stepped forward, asking anxiously. What else could I do? I had to take a chance. I leaned in and whispered to her, "Your daughter is possessed. I'm sure you've noticed something is very wrong with her. I have a very powerful master who's nearby. If you want, I can call him over." I glanced at the convulsing girl and added, "Time is running out, madam." The woman wasn't easily fooled. After hearing me, she stared at me in terror, her eyes sharp with suspicion. "What kind of nonsense is this? You're just a young girl. Why are you pretending to be a con artist? How dare you say she's possessed?" She was so agitated that she didn't control her voice, and soon everyone present knew I was a fraud and a charlatan. I'd never been stared at and gossiped about like this before. My face burned with embarrassment, and I wanted to turn around and leave. But for the sake of my lost soul fragment, I held back. I'm not a fraud. I can't explain it all right now, and there are too many people here. Can we talk somewhere privately? Talk privately so you can trick me better? I'm not that stupid. If you have any conscience at all, You won't deceive a grief-stricken mother at a time like this." The woman shouted at me, spitting flying onto my face. I glared at Evan resentfully, cursing him 100 times in my head. I'd never been in such an awkward, humiliating situation before. I wanted to sink into the ground and disappear. But the culprit was standing there, smiling faintly, showing no sign of coming to my aid. I felt a surge of anger in my chest. "I really want to help you and your daughter," I whispered, feeling guilty. It was my first time in such a situation, and I had no idea how to persuade them to believe me. Just then, a clear voice sounded beside me. "Mrs. Young, please calm down. She's my schoolmate. She's not a fraud." I turned around and saw Silas. I was shocked. Why was he sticking up for me? "This con artist is your schoolmate?" Mrs. Young asked, disbelieving. Silas's eyes darkened as he replied to Mrs. Young, "Madam, I told you, she's not a fraud." Mrs. Young nodded awkwardly. "I see, but your schoolmate she." Silas glanced at the girl, who was convulsing more and more violently, and said in a deep voice, "Putting aside whether a regular doctor can save her, in her current state, if we don't take action soon, it will be too late by the time the ambulance arrives. And then, I'm afraid you'll have to prepare for the worst, Mrs. Young." As soon as he finished speaking, the sound of the girl's bones cracking became even clearer. Mrs. Young turned pale with fear and looked at me. "Young lady, is your master really able to save my daughter?" Thinking of Evan's abilities, I nodded firmly. But I couldn't help feeling confused. Why was Silas helping me? Could he really not be the monster that had tried to eat me? With my request and Silas's help, all the onlookers were asked to leave, including Mrs. Young. Finally, Silas also prepared to leave. Before he left, his gaze swept over the spot where Evan was standing. Then he looked at me and said, "Don't worry about saving her. I'll keep an eye on things outside." With that, Silas closed the ballroom door. Once I was sure everyone was gone, I shouted at Evan, "Everyone's left. Hurry over here. I don't know anything about this. How do we save her?" Evan finally walked over slowly, but his face was dark with anger. Instead of checking on the girl immediately, he looked at me with a sneer. "I see you're quite popular with the opposite sex, little thing." "Who are you calling a little thing?" I protested. It was rude to refer to someone as a thing. "Oh," Evan drawled, raising an eyebrow. "So you're saying you're not a thing?" I opened my mouth to retort, then realized Evan was teasing me. Calling me not a thing was a way of insulting me. "You..." I choked up, then my eyes lit up. I whispered, "Evan, are you jealous because you saw Silas helping me?" "Jealous?" Evan laughed as if he'd heard the funniest joke. He pulled a small mirror out of his wide sleeve and tossed it to me. I caught it instinctively, confused. "Why are you giving me a mirror?" Evan smiled mischievously. "Take a look. Do you really think you're worth me being jealous of?" This dragon was so mean. "Then why are you being so sarcastic?" I muttered softly. Evan ignored me and turned to check on the girl. By now, she was convulsing uncontrollably, her eyes rolling back, sometimes completely white, sometimes completely black. It was terrifying. If this wasn't possession, what was it? I inched closer to Evan, staying behind him. Possessed people were too scary. Who knew if this thing was contagious? Heh. Coward. Evan glanced at me, then waved his hand, lifting the girl into the air as if an invisible hand was holding her. She floated in midair, a strange and terrifying sight. It wasn't about being a coward. I was genuinely scared of these weird, supernatural things. The images of those ghosts trying to eat me were still fresh in my mind, impossible to forget. Evan scanned the girl for a few seconds, then said, "She's possessed by resentment. To save her, we need to drive out that resentment. But this resentment is extremely powerful. Resentment doesn't attack people for no reason. There must be some connection here." The girl's limbs were twisting so violently that they looked like they were going to curl into a ball. I said to Evan, "Before we figure out the connection, can we stop her from twisting like this? At this rate, she's going to snap like a twig." Evan responded with action. He raised his hand, his slender fingers tapping lightly in the air. A faint golden light surrounded the girl, and her convulsions and twisting stopped immediately. Bathed in the golden light, the girl temporarily returned to normal. Her delicate, beautiful appearance looked like an angel's. I've temporarily suppressed the resentment in her body, Evan said. Quickly ask her about your lost soul fragment while she's conscious. How long will she stay conscious? I asked. 3 days, Evan replied. After 3 days, the suppressed resentment will strike back. But that's more than enough time to get the answers we need. Aren't we going to help her drive out the resentment completely? I asked, surprised. Evan looked at me strangely. Why would I help her? One of you is already enough trouble. Is a stranger really worth my effort to save? Logically, he was right, and I wasn't some saint. But I had promised Mrs. Young that I would save her daughter. If something happened to her in 2 days, Mrs. Young, who is clearly wealthy and influential, would definitely come after me. I told Evan my concerns, but he just glanced at me coldly and said, "Oh, is that so? Then when they come after you, I'll stay out of the way." I still remembered the fiery kiss he had given me that night. How could someone who had kissed me so passionately say such cold words? As Evan and I were talking, the girl woke up. She looked confused at first, but quickly came to her senses. I had no idea why she could see Evan, but before I could react, I saw her scream in terror and try to throw herself into Evan's arms. My face turned ashen. This girl had a lot of nerve, daring to throw herself at Evan? As expected, just as she was about to reach him, Evan stretched out his long arm, placing his hand on her forehead to stop her in her tracks. "Don't touch me," Evan said in a cold, sharp voice, his eyes filled with murderous intent. The girl froze, too scared to move. I had to admit, Evan was such a straight man. But somehow, seeing him push her away made me secretly happy. "I am sorry, I'm just so scared," the girl stammered, her voice trembling. Even though I was like that just now, I was fully conscious. I could feel my limbs twisting, and something terrible was pulsing in my veins. "I'm so scared." She said she was scared, but her eyes kept drifting to Evan. I took a few steps forward, standing between them to block her gaze. Even though she looked pitiful, possessed by resentment, there was something about her behavior that felt fake, like she was putting on an act to get attention. I had no idea what connection my lost soul fragment had to her, so I gently tapped Evan on the arm. "Hey, how should I ask her about the soul fragment?" Other than the soul-guiding jade getting hot, I knew nothing. I still had to rely on him. Evan looked at me impatiently, then pulled me into his arms and pushed me behind him, standing in front of me to block me. "Stay back, useless thing." I didn't dare to complain. I really didn't know anything about this. Facing Evan, the girl bowed her head shyly. "Thank you so much for saving me today. If it weren't for you, I would have died. May I ask your name, sir?" She held out her hand and said, "Let me introduce myself. My name is Chloe, and I'm a student at Cloud City University." Chloe? That name sounded familiar. I stared at her face for a few seconds, then it hit me. No wonder she looked familiar. She was the campus beauty of Cloud City University. I never thought I would meet the legendary gentle and kind campus beauty in such a situation. But why had she only thanked Evan, completely ignoring me, the one who had stood up for her in front of everyone? I had risked being mocked to help her, and she had just brushed me off. Evan looked at Chloe expressionlessly, but there was a hint of mockery in his eyes. "I couldn't care less about your name or which school you go to." The gentle smile froze on Chloe's face, and she awkwardly pulled back her outstretched hand. "I have a few questions for you. I expect you to answer truthfully. If you hide anything—" Evan didn't finish his sentence, but the cold, sharp look in his eyes was enough to send chills down anyone's spine. Chloe nodded rapidly, like a chicken pecking at rice. "Ask me anything, sir. I'll tell you everything I know." "Did anything unusual happen to you before you had the attack tonight?" "I only want to hear about tonight. You don't need to mention anything before that," Evan said calmly. The soul-guiding jade had only started burning tonight, which meant my lost soul fragment must have connected with Chloe tonight. I stared at her intently. This was a matter of life and death for me. Chloe, you have to think carefully. Well, Chloe's face turned pale, and she said softly, I don't know. It just happened all of a sudden. It just happened all of a sudden? That was impossible. Evan had given me the soul-guiding jade, and it couldn't be wrong. Besides, Evan had said my soul fragment was related to Chloe. She must know something. You don't know? Evan narrowed his eyes. He took a few steps forward, his tall figure casting a shadow over Chloe, filling her with an overwhelming sense of oppression. I could feel the chill even from where I was standing, let alone Chloe. Do you need me to help jog your memory? Evan said, a friendly smile playing on his lips. Cold sweat broke out on Chloe's forehead. She hurried to say, Please don't be angry, sir. I'll think again. I'm sure I can remember something. Why didn't she just think harder earlier? She had to go and make Evan angry. Even I, his so-called fiancé, didn't dare to provoke him, let alone Chloe, a stranger. I don't have much patience, Evan said. You have 3 minutes to think carefully. With that, Evan picked me up and carried me to a nearby lounge area, where he sat down. Evan sat in a relaxed, unrestrained posture, one leg bent, his elbow resting on his knee, and his fingers tapping casually on the armrest of the leather sofa. In the quiet room, the only sound was the tapping of his fingers, which made the atmosphere more and more tense. I couldn't help but look at Evan and whispered, Evan, do you really think Chloe knows something? She looks so confused. Evan let out a cold laugh in response. Women, they're the best liars, especially beautiful ones. His gaze swept over me casually, making my skin crawl. What did his look mean? Did he think I was lying to him too? I admitted that some of the compliments I'd given him had been a bit exaggerated, but could he really read my mind? Keep staring, and I'll gouge your eyes out, Evan said softly, his voice eerie. I quickly looked away. This man was terrifying when he was angry. I really didn't want to provoke him. But I couldn't help wondering, had Evan been deceived by a beautiful woman before? 3 minutes passed quickly. Before Evan could remind her, Chloe spoke up. I've been thinking hard, and something strange did happen to me tonight before I had the attack. Evan gave her a questioning look, and Chloe quickly said, Tonight, Brother Silas put a ring on my finger, then left without saying a word. The strange thing was, Brother Silas looked really pale tonight. He didn't look like himself at all. Where's the ring? Evan frowned. Chloe quickly held up her hand to show us, but there was no ring on her finger. It was completely empty. Chloe looked shocked, staring at her hand in disbelief. How could it be gone? I was wearing it earlier. It was a ruby ring, so beautiful. I never took it off, but now. I could tell Chloe was confused, and I was even more so. The ring had disappeared without a trace, just like my jade pendant had. And the most important thing was that Chloe had said Silas had given her the ring. But Silas had just helped me. What was going on here? My head felt like a mess. Other than being a ruby ring, did it have any other special features? Evan asked directly. Chloe didn't dare to delay. She quickly replied, It all happened so fast that I didn't get a good look. I only noticed it was a ruby with beautiful patterns on the band. It felt cool when I put it on my finger. That's all I know. Evan's expression didn't change. He stood up and said to me, There's no useful information here. Let's go. I jumped up quickly and stood beside Evan. When Chloe heard he was leaving, panic filled her beautiful face. In her hurry, she grabbed the sleeve of Evan's robe. My breath hitched. Chloe, don't be stupid. This handsome man had a terrible temper. Wait a minute, sir. Chloe said anxiously. I heard what you said earlier. You only temporarily suppress the resentment possessing me. What will happen to me when the resentment strikes back? Evan looked at her hand holding his sleeve with disgust. He shook his arm to free himself, his eyes cold and emotionless as he stared at her. What's that got to do with me? Chloe's beautiful face turned pale instantly. She bit her lip, looking delicate and helpless as she said softly, But I heard what the girl behind you told my mom. She said she could cure me. If you don't cure me, my mom will definitely. Was she threatening me? If we didn't save her, her mom would come after me? I didn't even need to think about it. Of course she would. Are you threatening me? At that moment, Evan was emanating a cold, murderous aura. He raised his hand slightly, pinching Chloe's neck in midair and lifting her up. His black eyes were deep and terrifying. No one dares to threaten me. He tightened his grip, and Chloe's face turned purple. It was clear he was serious about choking her to death. I quickly grabbed Evan's arm and said anxiously, "Don't actually kill her. Just teach her a lesson. If you kill her, we'll be in big trouble, especially me." Evan's body suddenly froze. He looked down at my chest. I suddenly realized that in my hurry, I had pressed my entire body against his arm, my chest squishing against it. The atmosphere turned extremely awkward in an instant. When I realized what was happening, I quickly pulled away, looking at Evan with a pitiful expression. We couldn't afford to kill someone right now. The police would definitely come after me. Evan's eyes flickered. He suddenly let go of his hand, and Chloe fell to the ground, looking dizzy and disoriented. "Fine, I'll spare her life," Evan said, looking at me. His voice was laced with ambiguity and a hint of hidden danger, his eyes sweeping over me with obvious scrutiny. "But you'll have to pay a small price, like coming with me tonight." The hidden meaning in his eyes made my spine tingle. I didn't even dare to ask where he was taking me or what exactly this price would be. To make things worse, Silas was still guarding the door. Was he really helping me?